He calls himself the head of the house, and I nod along even when the decision hurts me because when I don't, he says I'm being disrespectful. Every day it shows up in small, ordinary ways. He decides what we spend money on. Not in a dramatic way, he just asks me to run it by him first. Groceries are fine. Gas is fine. But anything beyond that, even things for the house, even something I need, turns into a conversation where he asks why it's necessary. If I push back, he reminds me he's responsible for our finances and that responsibility means final say. When family is around, he answers questions about our plans without looking at me. If someone asks my opinion, he'll laugh lightly and say, "She trusts me with that," like it's a compliment. At church, he talks about leadership and order and people nod. At home, that same language turns into rules I didn't agree to but am expected to follow. I notice how careful I've become with my words. I don't interrupt him anymore even when I disagree. I wait until later, and sometimes later never comes because the moment passes or he's tired or it doesn't seem worth it. When I do bring something up, he reframes it. If I say I felt dismissed, he says my tone was wrong. If I say I want more input, he says I'm challenging his role. The actual issue disappears, replaced by a discussion about my attitude. Publicly, he's calm and confident. Privately, he's firm and final. The contrast is subtle enough that if I describe it, it sounds like nothing. I keep questioning myself. I wonder if I'm being too sensitive. I tell myself that every marriage needs structure, that someone has to lead, and that maybe I'm just not used to that kind of clarity. I minimize it by saying at least he's consistent. At least he doesn't disappear. At least he doesn't cheat. I defend him even in my own head. I tell myself I agreed to this when I married him, even though I don't remember agreeing to losing my voice. Sometimes I think maybe peace requires sacrifice and maybe this is mine. We met in a very ordinary way. A mutual friend introduced us after a small gathering. We talked about work, about family, about faith. He was straightforward. He said what he believed without hesitation, and at the time that felt grounding. There was no guessing where he stood. He followed up when he said he would. He planned dates. He paid the bills on time. There was nothing chaotic about him. I remember thinking that being with him would mean stability. Early on, things felt safe because they were predictable. He liked routines. He made plans and stuck to them. Decisions were made quickly, and that reduced my anxiety. I didn't have to worry about what was happening next. He framed that decisiveness as maturity. He talked about building a household with clear roles, and I interpreted that as teamwork. It felt grown up. It felt like someone had thought this through. I didn't feel swept up in romance. I felt settled. The first shift was small enough that I almost missed it. We were discussing a purchase for the apartment, and I suggested a cheaper option. He paused, then said we'd talk about it later. Later never came. When I brought it up again, he said he'd already decided. I remember feeling embarrassed for bringing it up twice. Another time we disagreed in front of friends about where to spend a holiday. He smiled and said, "We'll do what makes sense," then booked the trip he wanted. When I mentioned it afterward, he said I shouldn't have contradicted him publicly. I brushed it off. I told myself timing matters. Over time it became a pattern. If I stayed quiet, things went smoothly. If I questioned him, the mood shifted. He wouldn't raise his voice, but he'd withdraw warmth. He'd become formal. I learned which topics were safe and which weren't. Around others, he'd speak for both of us, and I'd let him. People praised how aligned we seemed. At home, I edited myself. I stopped suggesting alternatives. I asked permission instead of sharing opinions. Silence was rewarded with calm. Speaking up came with tension I didn't have energy for. I started explaining it away to myself and to others. I said he was traditional. I said it was cultural. I said finances are stressful and someone has to be firm. I know this sounds small, but I told myself strong leadership looks like this. I said compromise can be messy, and maybe he was protecting us from that. I'd say he just believes conflict weakens a marriage. At the same time, I felt myself shrinking. Both things were true, and I held them together without knowing how. I stay for concrete reasons. My faith matters to me, and divorce isn't just a personal decision, it would be a public one. Our families are intertwined. I don't have my own income. I rely on him financially, and that dependence is real, not theoretical. I stay because I don't want to explain myself to people who already see him as a good man. I stay because I'm afraid of being judged for failing at something that was supposed to be sacred. These aren't emotional reasons, they're practical and heavy. Leaving feels harder than it looks because it would mean starting from zero. No income of my own. No clear place to go without questions. Losing the community that currently supports us because it supports him. It would mean admitting out loud that the structure I defended is also what trapped me. The risk isn't just loneliness. It's instability, shame, and the possibility of being blamed for not submitting enough. There wasn't a dramatic moment that woke me up. It was quieter than that. It was realizing that every disagreement ended the same way. It was noticing that my first instinct in any situation was to ask what he'd think, not what I wanted. It was hearing him tell someone else that compromise shows weakness, and feeling something settle in my chest because I finally named the pattern without excusing it. Right now I'm still here. I haven't made a decision. I'm more aware, but I'm not free. I go along to keep the peace, and each time I do, it costs me something I can't quite measure yet. I don't know if this is what partnership is supposed to feel like, or if I've confused order with care. Is obedience the same as love?